This is the Bama Podcast with Marty Solomon. I'm his co-host, Brent Billings. Today, I am back with Elle Grover Fricks and Josh Bossé to truly cap off this series by taking a second gander at the Lord's Prayer.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh.
And you know what they say, what's good for the first gander is also good for the second gander.
I have heard that so many times.
Yeah, honestly, I was struggling a little bit with this one because I cannot overstate how much I appreciated the last episode, and just at every single person I've talked to who's in my larger chavurah, I'm like, you'll never guess the bit at the end of the Lord's Prayer that we all hate and poo-poo is now back on because it's a dang remez, and
Doxology is back on the menu, boys.
It's great. Yeah.
I tried to, because I was like, I don't know, I'm a little uncomfortable at this when we were interviewing Andrew DeCourt, and he, put up a fine argument for it. And so I've been using it ever since we recorded that episode, and I'm happy to have an even stronger foundation for it now.
I love it.
However, you bring your own wealth of treasures, and I am delighted. I'm looking forward to on tenterhooks.
Yes,
a blessing on the Bama Podcast, an abundance of takes on the Lord's Prayer.
Absolutely.
Like we said, like we intimated last time, is there going to be a bottom to this? Probably not. You can, you the listener may even hear some new things that we could not have even conceived of. It is not only possible, it's true. But that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I'm here to talk about the Lord's Prayer. Now, just to give us all a little refresher, Brent, will you please read us, once again in the King James, the Lord's Prayer?
Oh, you guys are killing me. There's no way that's what you actually want, is it? You're just doing that because Elle did that to me?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's what we live for.
Fine, let me bring it up.
It's legit. It's historical. We're tapping into our spiritual ancestors. Brent, the path has been laid before us.
Hashtag not my ancestors. All right, here we go. After this manner, therefore, pray ye, Our Father, which art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom and the power and the glory forever. Amen.
Possibly the most enthusiastic reading ever recorded.
I'm weary. I'm weary.
Yeah, let's not antagonize. He's done a very, very good job. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Brent.
That was more like middle school Brent. I've said this, 10 times today because I did the rosary, and now I'm saying it 5 times in the Mass, and I'm truly just like going through the motions at this point.
Yes. Well, hopefully it will be worth it. So, like I alluded to before, I was having a little bit of trouble thinking what I could add, but some of the themes that poked their head up in your episode last week, Elle, I want to expound more on, and that is primarily the theme of the Exodus, which we really only talked about with regards to the manna specifically. But the more I looked into it, the more connections I found. So I want to start over and break it down a little bit like you did, not in the Talmudic way, but just, but I liked how you did it going line by line. I'm like, oh, hey, isn't this kind of a theological problem to say God's in heaven and not everywhere? Isn't it a problem to see this and not that? So here's what I want to do. I want to do that here. So let's start. What's the very first thing that the Lord's Prayer asserts?
That God is our parent.
Yes. And where is the very first time in the text that we see this image stated explicitly?
Well, you already gave us the answer, probably. That it's probably in Exodus.
You're right. It is in Exodus. Brent,
okay.
Flip that big old dusty Bible over to Exodus 4:22. And I don't mean to imply by that you need to read it in the King James. You can read it in whatever. I'll let you. You can read it in the NET. You can read it in whatever.
Exodus 4:22. You said.
Yes.
Then say to Pharaoh, "This is what the Lord says: Israel is my firstborn son."
Boom.
Boom.
There we go.
Boom.
And what's interesting about this too, beforehand, if you look up, God and Father or anything like that, trying to find an earlier reference, there might be one that I am not thinking of right now. But usually they talk about the God of our fathers, which, Elle, as I'm sure you know, like that is usually one of the first opening blessings of the proper 18, the kosher Amidah. So they
Right.
go through the blessings of the God of the patriarchs. And I love that in just that first line, our Father, we are drawn immediately to that initial image of rescue, the image that God invokes, not to Israel, even just to say like, I'm your father, but to go for Moses to go right to Pharaoh's face and say, hey, God says that Israel is their firstborn son. You better let them go. Like that protective, paternal rescue image is just so, bam, right out the gate.
I love
not
that.
The God of our fathers and their merit and our traditions. Like, not that any of that's bad, but just Jesus chooses to tell it in this different way. It sizzles.
I love that context because if we just hear dad, we can import all of our our personal, our cultural connotations into that space. But when we root it in the text in Exodus, it's like, oh yeah, primary identity of God, rescuer.
Yeah.
Love that.
And then when I was thinking about this, I don't think I would have ever before been just like, oh yeah, identifying God with heaven is kind of weird. But I was thinking about this especially because of, the ancient, you'd usually associate gods with earth as well. So I don't know if there's some kind of play there. But what is very interesting to me is when I just poked around saying, hey, is there anything in the whole Exodus to Sinai narrative that talks about this? Well, when God first speaks to the people, does anyone remember what their posture is when they get to Sinai and God starts talking to them, telling them the 10 Commandments and whatnot?
What their posture is?
Yeah. How do they react?
Like, why did you bring us out here?
No, they weren't quite at that point yet. If you'd like, you could turn to Exodus 20, verse 22, Brent. The people are afraid.
22. We're going to read verse 22 of every chapter of Exodus.
Yes, exactly.
Amazing. More text, it's a better time.
God rings out the 10 Commandments, and then the people freak the heck out. They say, you speak to God. If we have to speak to God, we're going to die. We're so afraid. And Moses says, don't be afraid. But, God's coming to us with good intentions. Just chill out. So the people are holding still, and then God comes in. And what does God say, Brent?
Then the Lord said to Moses, tell the Israelites this: you have seen for yourselves that I have spoken to you from heaven.
I have spoken to you from heaven. And this, to me, took what you observed, Elle, of God being in a separate place and the weirdness of that, especially in light of Jesus' insistence that God is right in front of us. The kingdom is happening at our very fingertips, and is reminding us that we started not being able to get too close, that God was withdrawn for our benefit. God was withdrawn to give us space to be willing to take that step of faith and trust that God has a good story for us. I like it. It's pretty wonderful. And we'll actually return to this because immediately after this, we have the 10 Commandments. God gives a few other commandments that are usually labeled under that favorite category of sundry commandments.
Sundry.
Yes, sundry. We will come back to that.
Charming.
So we have this image of God rescuing us, and also an image of our brokenness, of the way in which we come into this rescuing relationship badly needing rescuing. And that because of that, our relationship with God is not always able to attain to that close parental nurturing, that there is a dissonance there of, our Father being in heaven, our Father is far away. And I think that is, again, a really interesting way to situate ourselves when we come to God in prayer, especially because, I'm not sure if we mentioned this in the last episode, but the Amidah prayer is still like the most common, probably about as central in Judaism as the Lord's Prayer is in Christianity, if not more so. And it's prayed 3 times a day.
Yes.
So this is very much like a daily thing that you return to multiple times a day. And to remember like that the distance that we can feel from God, that God is trying to rescue us and liberate us, but at the same time that because of the fact that, it's not even our own fault. I'm not saying, like, us bad humans, we can't bear to be in front of God, but like, we're finite. We have our own baggage and scars and weaknesses that are just natural. And that is also part of the situation of how we can approach God.
Mm.
But then I want to, let's move on to the next point, unless anyone has any thoughts.
I love the setting of prayer and making room for folks who don't feel like intangibly, immediately in the embrace of God, to be like, here I am, we're so good, God, and I know that, and it's out of that place that I show up and talk to you. It's like, if I hear you correctly, making that distance a piece of it. And if you're lining up the commandments, right, which was a big theme from the last episode, and that's their response when they hear the commandments, then that all makes sense thematically to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we'll be coming back to the commandments. Don't you worry. But actually, this next piece, the hallowed be thy name, this, I think, I really appreciated you picking apart like the technicality of that, because especially in a lot of, simpler English language translations, they'll just say, your name is holy, which is,
right.
Again, one of those where it's like, yeah, check. That is one of those true things about God. But when it's hallowed, let your name be made holy. Well, why does it need to be made holy?
Right.
And this is where I think if we think about things being made holy, well, obviously we have the first one being Shabbat in the first creation story, right at the beginning of Genesis 2.
Sure.
But the next instance of something being sanctified, that I could find at least, and it uses the same, I checked in the Septuagint just to see how much of this connectivity was there in the Greek, even though I don't lean on that super hard, but it's there. Brent, go to Exodus 13, verse 2, not 22, verse 2.
Close, though.
I know, yeah, still pretty close.
While he's navigating, I would posit, in the name of our executive producer who isn't here right now, that it would make a lot more sense in the Hebrew than it does in the Greek, because this kind of we desire it to be so is one of the modal voices that you can imply specifically.
Oh, yes.
The cohortative voice, or perhaps if you're talking about God, instead of, you can use gessive or cohortative, and it would be very easy to slap a hey on there. And it's almost as if Matthew wasn't originally in Greek. Okay, I'm done.
Oh, man.
Almost as if.
Almost as if.
Okay, Exodus 13, verse 2, consecrate to me every firstborn male. The first offspring of every womb among the Israelites belongs to me, whether human or animal.
Yes, and this is right in the thick of the first Pesach, immediately following the actual Pesach, the passing over. And they have left Egypt, and they've been given a bunch of laws about remembering Pesach, doing this in the future. And then at the end of it, that's when God says, sanctify every firstborn. And when we think about these last 2 points in concert with this, kind of as a little 3 points, which I believe in the versing of the Lord's Prayer, these 3 are put together. And it kind of even works in how we say it in English. The sanctification of the firstborn kind of means something different when we are God's firstborn, Because what does that mean? If we're God's firstborn, that means we inherit God's work, right? Like that's what the Bechor does, carries on the Father's work. And that also has very much to do with carrying on the Father's name. In fact, this is the whole issue with levirate marriage, Yibum marriage, and Er and Onan and why they died. This is all saying the same thing, that in a certain sense, the God initially calling out like Israel is my firstborn, and that's the image of rescue. Now this image of let your name be sanctified, this connects even more strongly with what you said, Elle, last time, of we do that by continuing our Father's work. And God is holy, but do we continue God's work in a way that also continues to make his name holy?
The Lord willing and the creek don't rise.
Exactly.
Yes. And I believe Paul, our boy Paulos, is going to make the argument in the epistles that Jesus is the firstborn. But as Jesus' followers, we're walking in that way, right? We're doing whatever he's modeling for us to do, pointing us to do.
And I do love too the way that like all the like family tree lineage stuff is thrown around, because it really does just make, like, if you tried to chart out in a very literal sense, every statement that is made about our familial ties to God, to Jesus, it becomes very messy. Like, I don't know, you could probably prove that Jesus is our brother and uncle and whatever else.
All of the above.
Husband, all of the above. Yeah.
Right. Husband's in there.
Yes. Yeah. We can't forget husband. So yeah, it's this is where, it's a little bit sticky in that sense of like, what exactly am I saying here? But what I love about it is that when taken together, this is, again, it gives us God's position toward us, and then our, position in real time of needing some space, but then the synthesis of those things but we're here to bring about the union of those two things. We are trying to take on your name. We are trying to make it holy in how we live that out and live up to our firstborn status, even if we feel like we're in two totally different realities.
Right.
And that's just where we start here in Matthew. Oh, wonderful.
So if I line it up, we've got our Father, our rescuer, right? If we were going to do a little symmetrical paraphrase here, our rescuer, who sometimes does not feel close at hand. May we walk as your firstborn as we ought.
Yes.
Is that what we're building here? Okay, great.
Sure,
great.
Yeah.
Making so then I'm tracking.
This next chunk, I kind of want to attack this all together as one. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven.
In earth, we're using King James English here, guys.
In earth.
Yes, in the earth.
See, you guys, even you realize
here's the thing,
subconsciously how ridiculous it is.
Is it more accurate because we have the two spheres and we're in the earthly sphere, Brent?
Oh, sure. Yeah, you can make an argument for it when you step back.
Yes.
But your instincts say on earth, because that
Boo.
Is how our language works today.
I was also just reading from the NASB. That's my own little preference for whatever.
See, I knew you were doing King James for Elle.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally admit to doing it capriciously. This episode exists within the shadow of Elle's episode. I couldn't make such a radical departure.
Got him, Elle. I got him.
You did.
I'm not protesting. I was never protesting it. I said from the beginning. I'm being capricious.
Yeah, very generous.
I'm bullying Brent. Is that what you want me to admit? I'll admit it freely. I was bullying Brent. I made him read the King James Version when he didn't want to.
but because we believe in repentance, what we're really doing is lovingly leading Brent back to the path, the way.
Well, we haven't got to leading yet. That's later. That's later.
Okay.
In prayer.
All right. Well, let me not delay you further.
Your kingdom come, your will be done, which also we should note the word will used here. Elle, do you know what it is in the Hebrew? Or not the Hebrew, in the Greek.
The Greek? No, I do not.
So this word for will also means desire, which very much fits with a Eastern Hebrew worldview. Score another point for Hebrew Matthew, whatever.
Ding, ding, ding. All day, every day.
So I couldn't find like a single verse in Exodus that really brought these ideas together. But when I was looking around trying to find, kingdom words, will words, what comes up a lot is Pharaoh.
Ooh.
And there are certain instances when they just reference Pharaoh as Pharaoh. And sometimes they remind us that this is Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And so one of those is when God hardens the heart of Pharaoh, king of Egypt, to chase after Israel when they are leaving in the Exodus. And similarly, the Greek word for will, when I looked in the Septuagint, it's used at a couple points where it specifically talks about when Pharaoh changes his mind and decides he doesn't want to let the Israelites go. He just doesn't want to. But the one that I want us to read, the one I want you to read, Brent, is Exodus 1:17.
So close. I was actually looking at Exodus 1:22.
Ooh.
You're like, I don't know. I didn't find anything specific. I was like, well, I'm just going to look at verse 22 of every chapter. And verse 22 is talking about Pharaoh. And I was like, I got it. But okay, 17. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live.
Aha. Here we go. And this, I think, is one other beautiful kind of gloss on this this little triptych here in verse 10 of Matthew 6. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. In earth as it is in heaven. Pardon me. Is that specifically, God's kingdom and God's will is not just something that exists in a vacuum here in earth. It is something that is opposed by something like the will of the king of Egypt, Pharaoh. And I especially love that this comes in so early in Exodus, like even before God reaches out and starts doing anything, they are going against the will of the king. These are not concepts that existed just because God came here and said, I want to set up a kingdom. We have kings and kingdoms and wills of what is to be done. And it is in contrast to those things that God's kingdom exists, why that idea has meaning and power and is something radical. Just like we see this kind of radical, it kind of goes beyond civil disobedience, but these women, these midwives, refusing to carry out this genocide on behalf of the Pharaoh, refusing to let Pharaoh's kingdom come, refusing to let Pharaoh's will be done. And even though they didn't have a clear idea of what God's kingdom was or what Adonai was going to bring them to at Sinai, they still were able to say, not this, not this kingdom.
This isn't it.
And I think, again, especially in light of that first little 3 bullet points of like, God is our Father and trying to rescue us, but we are distant. There's this kind of infinite interacting with the finite, weird, philosophical paradox of being human beings trying to interact with God. And we yearn to be good stewards of that. And I think when we turn and look at the world around us, on earth as it is, in earth as it is in heaven, on earth as it is in heaven, whatever. Who cares?
Prepositions. They're all the same.
I've really gotten into your head. Sorry.
You've broken my preposition lobe in my brain. That we can look around at that and say, okay, this is not right. We need not this kingdom, but God's kingdom. We need not my will, but God's will. And that, I think, is the first step. Like this desire for God to come and rule and lead our lives primarily comes from us looking at what happens when our base human desires are running the show, whether that's greed and accumulation or violence or any of those things. And I think that, again, as a human being, remembering 3 times a day, okay, yes, like I can look around me and see all these injustices, and without even getting into what it means to, when we talk about God's kingdom, what we're specifically talking about, like, it's not as if, you can vote for that, or that there are policy positions that God puts out every year that we're like, yes, vote for this because this is what God wants. And, that we could probably get into that. I may need to throw in the back pedal button here, but, there is a deep sense that is important here, I think, if we're approaching this prayer from the perspective of Exodus, of God's liberation, of God's rescue, God's saving us, that when we turn to the world, sometimes all we can just say is, not this, not Pharaoh's kingdom, God's kingdom. Anyway, that's the point I was making.
Straight stick next to a crooked stick. I love that.
Ooh,
I did a little looking around because the word will in Hebrew is a little bit slippery.
Yeah. What word do you peg that as? Chafetz? Is that the?
No, I would pick for that ratzon.
Ah, yes. Okay.
So, and again, that's slippery. People have a hard time translating it, including me. So sometimes you see it as willful. Sometimes you see it as pleasing or delightful or acceptable. So it's even harder to nail down in the English, because how are you supposed to know when it says ratzon or not? But it shows up in this one place in Exodus, which is always nice when there's only one.
Yes.
And the bells went off in my head because it also has ding, 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 holiness in it. So the context in Exodus 28, verse 38, is talking about this plate. It's talking about Aharon's drip.
Oh,
it's great.
The plate.
Great outfit.
I knew it was going to be the plate. Oh.
And he's got this turban going, and he's got this gold plate on it, and it says holiness to the Lord. And then if we jump down to verse 38, I happen to have my KJV up. Would you like me to do it, or would you like to
Please
switch
do.
over, Brent?
Please do it, yes.
And it shall be upon Aharon's forehead that Aharon may bear the iniquity of the holy things, which the children, ding, 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 of Yisrael shall hallow in all their holy gifts. And it shall be always upon his forehead that they may be accepted, ratzon, before the Lord. And so my little curiosity, as long as we're playing around in this playground you've built, Josh, of Exodus and the Lord's Prayer, this holiness thing with God's will being done, and whose empire are we listening to, or whose kingdom? God's kingdom. There is a means, and that means is the high priest. And the high priest is the one bearing the iniquity of things that are supposed to be holy that we're not quite doing right. And when we do that,
I love that.
When that is happening properly, then it is us who is within the will of God, right? We are accepted before the Lord, as well as our gifts that we're bringing.
I love that.
Party on. Oh, me too.
And I particularly like that. Outside of the specific line you're drawing, like this, I probably mentioned this in my Mishkan episode. I said a lot in my Mishkan series, so forgive me if I'm repeating myself. But
it's been a while. It's fine.
I love that, like, this image, which it goes beyond even an image, because the plate on the priest's head, it like has literal words on it. And
right.
How did you say? How did you translate it, Elle?
The KJV. How did the KJV say it?
Yes, it's Kodesh Ladonai.
Kodesh Ladonai.
So I've seen it translated as holy to God, like God regards this person as holy,
right?
In a sense, but I believe they translate it as like ascribing holiness to God.
The KJV goes with holiness to the Lord.
Yeah. Holiness to the Lord instead of holy to the Lord. But either way, I like the idea that the person running around with a gold plate on their head that says holiness to God, that plate specifically means that is the person who carries the weight of iniquity. Like that is a potent image of what it means to stand at the quote unquote top of God's quote unquote hierarchy, which, as we know, with Jesus is not really real. It's just we're just play acting these things. But
well, it is, but that means he's lower, but he's enthroned above all, and he's also pressed into the ground.
Exactly. So I really like that image, and that's actually going to play really well with how I'm going to wrap this whole thing up.
Oh, perfect.
But I think we've spent enough time on that. Unless, Brent, do you have any thoughts on this? Especially since you were already kicking around in Exodus 1 and this, these women fearlessly opposing the king?
Not exactly. I was sticking around in some of the NET footnotes to see what they were saying about this little chunk, and accidentally fell down a Doc Hypo rabbit hole. So
classic.
Well, then let me rescue you from that hole and say, let's turn over to Exodus chapter 16, verse 4. Because this will sprinkle in a couple things. This is going to involve manna, so we're kind of getting ahead of where we are in the prayer. But what's interesting to me is that at the end of this second bit of the prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Again, we have another emphasis of the disparity between earth and heaven, the separation we feel, the alienation we feel. We look at these kingdoms around us and we say, oh, I don't want this. I don't want this to be the way God's creation is being governed. I don't want this to be the way the world is run, that these people are being crushed and killed and oppressed. But Brent, why don't you go ahead and read that?
Then the Lord said to Moses, I will rain down bread from heaven for you. The people are to go out each day and gather enough for that day. In this way, I will test them and see whether they will follow my instructions.
Yes. Now, 90% of that I want us to put the brakes on. The first thing I want us to point out is that the bread is coming from heaven.
Yes.
And this, to me, is very important, because when we think about that separation and that disparity, especially with that initial image, we can see that as like, oh, that's evidence of my lack, my limitations, my fallenness, we might say, my brokenness. That's what's keeping me separated from God. I just can't bear to be in the presence of that much perfection. I'm too afraid. And so that distance can feel like just a reminder of how crummy everything is. And what I love is that this image takes that, that far awayness of God and makes it like, no, this heaven is not like just some place that's up too high for us. And it's like, oh, once you're tall enough, you can get up here. Once you're, holy enough, you can get up here. It's not that at all. It is some place that God's abundant love and desire from rescue. It's not contained. It is flowing down. It is falling down as bread. Even across this distance, there is sustenance. There is life being given, which, I talk about that at length in my John 6 episode, and so I'll refrain from saying too much about that. But in the context of Jesus praying and exhorting us to pray on earth as it is in heaven, I think this manna image, it isn't like it's good on its own. It has its own symbolism and meaning, but I think that manna is also part of how God crosses that gap to us, how we actually receive God's love, God's life-giving love in ways that are tangible and real, not just some like disembodied spiritual thing, but as literal bread, literal sustenance.
And what does Jesus do when he's walking around on earth?
Exactly.
What does he do? He brings some bread.
Yeah. I think even like the image of incarnation is very much the same. Like that ultimately God's the vision God gives us of heaven is not us finally becoming so holy that we build a good Tower of Babel and get ourselves up to heaven, but rather that God is coming down here. God is falling down like the manna. God's very body and substance is bread in our mouths.
That's good.
Oh.
That's good. bringing it back to the Eucharist.
Yes. And so then we take on earth as it is in heaven, not just as a reminder of like, oh, earth sucks, heaven, awesome. Wish I was there. Dang, that'll be cool
Earth
someday.
sucks. I know.
But rather, heaven is making its way here. Heaven is coming here, and it's every little drop of manna on our tongue. All right, now we get to verse 11. Give us this day our daily bread. And now I want to talk about all the other implications of that verse that Brent read. You know, we go out and get our portion every day, our daily bread, so that God may test them whether or not they will walk in my Torah, in my instruction. And I love this. I said this in our last episode, and I'll say it again because this, I promised it would be short. I did make a vow that this would be a short episode. But Rabbi David Foreman has he has a really great teaching breaking down how manna is even a test for what God says it's testing. But this connection between receiving manna, gathering manna, and in God's mind, this is so closely connected to living Torah, which when I think about, you know, what you talked about in your episode, Elle, like this is just so juicy. So first of all, any thoughts about that, about how receiving our daily bread, can it all be connected to how we live out God's will, how we bring heaven down to earth, how we make God's kingdom come and God's will be done?
I feel like on a experiential day to day, that's certainly true. Of like when I am living on the path that I'm supposed to be living and doing the things that God has given me to do, I experience that daily bread. And when I'm not, I'm more likely to be rolling on the ground like the Israelites in the desert being like, but like meat is better.
Yes.
I miss my meat pots.
Exactly. Oh, that's exactly where my head was going. Yeah. And I feel like a big part of that is, yeah, like, you know, there are lots of nice things that Empire has and has given us. Some of that I say, you know, totally unironically. There are nice things, you know, we talk about it many times, but like, you know, back in Jesus's day, like, yeah, like Romans had figured out like plumbing and stuff like that's, we
love plumbing.
We love plumbing. You heard it here. Bema, we do love plumbing. And there is a sense at which, you know, when we talk about daily bread and God taking care of our needs, I feel like there in our like culture where consumerism is baked into society and how we function, it is very hard to separate our daily bread and this attitude of receiving manna from kind of this bifurcation we have in our modern society of either you are just, you know, loving and living and laughing the consumerist lifestyle and you just love that there are so many brands that you love and can go and, you know, do that stuff. Or we can take this and make it about like asceticism and like, no, just take exactly what you need and nothing more, or you are an evil person. And I think that both of these are missing the point of, or are exist on a totally different axis from what Jesus is talking about here. Mm. Because yes, there is an element very clearly on the surface of the manna story about our tendency to want to save up more, to hoard, to you know, put a little away that's extra. And I mean, we would probably even most of us be able to say in the modern day, like, yeah, it's good to save. It's good to, you know, have a little extra just in case. But at the same time, like I remember when I was on my honeymoon with my wife, we were in Mexico at some resort and they had like, you know, a buffet and they had to have signs on all of the tables where they said, hey, food is a precious resource around here. Please don't take more than you will actually eat. It's really not cool. We have a lot of poverty here. Don't do that, please. And that was a very sobering thing to see every single time, you know, we wanted a quick meal. And that is a real problem. But at the same time, you know, I think the the kind of moral asceticism that we can kind of snap to as a response to that is equally a dead end. And it's kind of the January 1st resolutions response. Like that is also something the world does. The world is also there saying, hey, oh yeah, we'll have, a bunch of people telling you the 80 things you're not supposed to eat, and, flagellate yourself to prove you're a good person who is, healthy and right and meritorious. And I think that Jesus says it best when he talks about, everything that comes into the world and gives life. Like that is the bread of heaven. Everything that comes down from God and gives life to the world. This is not something that you can just make some broad sweeping statement about. It is something you actually have to be tuned in and discerning and in touch with God to remember, which is why I think it's so important to have it in this prayer, to remember that when we're talking about daily bread, we're not just talking about our literal sustenance, although that is part of it, but we also live in a time where, speaking to the Americans, the first world people in the crowd, especially, where having enough to eat is not really dominating our daily thoughts. We know that there are many other areas in which that same concept holds true. We live in places where emotionally and spiritually speaking, we can be in deserts and in, food deserts. Maybe we live in a place where there is not a lot of hope for our future, or maybe we live in a place where there's not a lot of joy to be had, or where there's not a lot of community to be found. And I think that we need to see daily bread in all of those things, in any area where we have need and lack, maybe even a need we didn't realize. This is where our senses can be attuned to God's provision, that little bit of hope, that little bit of joy. And, especially having a sub 1-year-old who is not great at sleeping. There are a lot of times where, I am at my physical limits, and it's not because I don't have enough money in the bank or enough food in the fridge. I'm just so tired, and I think, oh my gosh, am I going to have enough to say on this next podcast episode? Did I do enough research?
That fear never crosses my mind, Josh. Though the sleep may not be abundant, the wisdom is always abundant.
Yes, exactly. But, in a very, I'm not sure if all of you out there have read Ann Voskamp's book, was it 1,000 Gifts, 10,000 Gifts? However many gifts, it's a lot.
1,000.
1,000. Okay, I always want to say
many.
10,000. I don't know why. I've been on a 10,000 kick. 10,000 is, I don't know why it sticks with me, but I like 10,000. Maybe I'll write a book called 10,000 Gifts. Anyway, but the idea that when we stumble across something that is life-giving, especially in a surprising way, that we look at that and we say, that's my daily bread. That is nourishing me. That's, that's not just like, ooh, a cool sunrise. Let me, take a photo, post it to Instagram, and it's like, not like that's a bad thing inherently, but it's not there for that. It's there to remind you that, again, from the top, God is your parent. God is here to rescue you, to provide for you. Mm-hmm. And even though you need distance, even though we sometimes say we don't want distance, but we need that distance on a deep, deep level. And when we can see through it and see the manna of God's love peering back at us through the veil, whether it's through a sunrise or really, I don't know, a delicious meal, the love in someone's face, a smile that someone gave us at the right time. Maybe someone just laughed at your joke when you really needed someone to laugh at your joke. Like, I can't tell you how many bad days I've had with my wife where just like the right joke at the right time just flipped a switch and all the lights came on, That's daily bread.
And you know what's required, though? There's a requirement embedded in there for us to choose to feel silly, to choose to be potentially wrong about the fact that it's from God and God loving us. And it's not just like, I feel like if we were in the desert, we would walk out in the midst of like the manna coming down and we would be like, clearly, this is an explainable weather phenomenon. Give me some time and enough scientific instruments, and I would prove that this isn't about God loving me. This is just a coincidence. And at the end of the day, it's like, okay, maybe that sunrise wasn't for you and it's just because of pollution. I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay, well, you've been hoodwinked. You've been hoodwinked into joy and gratitude and connectedness with God. So I'm happy to be hoodwinked any day.
I would even argue that there is something redemptive in that. There's an element of that of like, we can get a little too sentimental sometimes and make God a little too sugary sweet and just like, oh, all the nice things are just God and everything else I don't look at. Like that's not what we're trying to say. This is again coming right after talking about thy kingdom come, thy will be done, because we see all the things that we look at and we're like, that ain't God, that ain't God, that ain't God. Why is that ruling everything around me?
Sure.
And it's after that we can say, I just need my daily bread. I know we're gonna get to heaven crashing into earth like you painted last time, Elle.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna get there. And just like David, piling up all these resources for a temple he wouldn't get to see, we can accept that, but you can't just live there and say, well, there's a temple I'm never going to get to see, and I'm just piling up stuff for that. I'm just waiting around to die. But no, you need some sustenance. You need something to connect you to God, and that is real. And that's why I think what you said, Elle, before about that playfulness and that silliness, that is really important. You need to embrace the fact that you are God's child. And if you misascribe something theologically, like, do you think God cares? Like, God probably cares enough the same way that, like, when my kid is 2 years old and he like comes up with some dumb reason for like, oh, mom and dad are, doing this probably because they really like bubbles or something, and they has some weird theory about he thinks we're blowing bubbles, and it's like, no, we were talking about taxes, and he misheard something. I thought we were talking about bubbles. And he had some weird theory, some whole world he built about us and bubbles. It's like, okay, I wouldn't look at my kid and just be like, oh, like you wasted your time thinking about that. I'd be like, wow, you're really imaginative, and that's really funny. It would make me laugh, And I feel like we have to be okay being the kid in the equation. Sometimes we're a little too quick to want to grow up in terms of our relationship with God. Mm. And simultaneously, I think it's important to have that silly posture, but also to look at this stuff as real sustenance, as something we need. And when we put those two things in tension, these are real needs. This isn't just frivolous stuff, and we're not all just, going to be manic pixie dream people just running around having cool spiritual adventures. Maybe we'll have seasons of that, but like that's not what we're here for. We can treasure those things with the lightness of heart and the joyfulness and the childlike faith that we're called to, while at the same time treating it with the reverence of saying, this is how God is sustaining me today. And maybe tomorrow I'll look back and say, oh yeah, that was kind of stupid. Oh yeah. Sometimes I like journal about things, and one day I'll think I've had some crazy insight, and I look back and I'm like, I think I was just, all hopped up and excited because of a movie I had seen, and I had taken some concept farther than it really deserved to go. But hey, it was what I needed for that day.
Yeah, the manic pixie, wow, I can't say it. The manic pixie dream character gets grounded by the commandments, right? Because if it is just me and Jesus, or me being led by the Spirit every day, and I don't have a structure of like, God's given me things to do, people to minister to, resources to steward, and there's a way that he would have me do that, then it's just like, woohoo, what are we going to do today, God? Which again can be an amazing vacation, and that's awesome. And yeah, I think it should be both, and because we don't want to lose that childlike faith like you're talking about.
But Elle, you've set me up perfectly. Is there another thought there? Because if not, the segue is right here. Forgive us our debts as we have forgiven our debtors. Now, this is what really set me on this path, because we didn't really touch on this in the last episode. But when I dug into the wording here, because, we were reading King James, and there's some archaic language that will sometimes they translate, what we would say love, they translate charity, weird stuff like that. So I was looking into it. But the word here for debts and debtors is quite literal. And that's a little bit strange, isn't it? Like, we usually talk about forgiveness of sins. So in fact, sometimes, this is translated as forgive us our sins as we forgive those who've sinned against us, but it's literally debt and debtors. And what this brought to mind for me was, I told you this will come back up when we go back to Exodus 20, the part where God says, I spoke to you out of heaven, and this, coming right after the 10 Commandments. We get a couple commandments about how to connect with God, how to build an altar. Don't build idols, build an altar. And then in the very next chapter, we get a bunch of laws about slaves, which is pretty ironic considering where they just came from, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because what was these recently freed slaves, without getting too far into it, the system that God sets up for slavery, quote unquote, I'll say very much quote unquote, because it's very different from a lot of times I think when we talk about slavery, our default is, American slavery, the kind of slavery we did, which is not this. This is primarily driven by when people are in debt, when you have a bad crop and you have, bills to pay that you can't pay. You would sell yourself into slavery or someone into slavery, and you would basically, kind of like go get a job, work for someone else on their land until you could pay off your debts.
I love that you pointed out before the episode started, we were chatting over the bullet points, and you brought up the slavery issue. And I feel like the biblical context that you pulled out can be so helpful, because when we hear the word slavery, we tend to import our own historical and sociological understandings and all this stuff, which doesn't always line up. But you said, which I thought was brilliant, that slavery was when your labor is divorced from the land, divorced from the means of production. So there's lots of different words that come up in the Hebrew. There's sachar, which is like a paid employee, and that's a little bit different. Avod, you can translate as slave or servant. So there's lots of different tiers and everything. But the idea is it's not your land. You have been divorced from your land, your means of production in some way, and now you're giving your labor to somebody else and their capital.
Yes, because in the biblical model, everyone has a portion of land. Every family has their own means of making life, and in fact, there are laws.
Jeffersonian.
Well, I don't know. The point being that the conversation about debt and being in debt and having someone who owes debt to you is a conversation about the very substance that makes up slavery, of needing to sell oneself into slavery. And so when Jesus talks about, forgiving debtors, as we have had our debts forgiven, we can read that as him talking about freedom from slavery. You free other people from slavery whenever it's in your power to do so. Let us set people free. And when we're talking about debt and debtors, like, this is not inherently a sin thing. Right? Like, this is not, someone did something wrong and I'm going to say, hey, don't worry about it. I'll overlook it. We're talking about, someone owes you money. We're not talking about, any compulsion to forgive someone for sinning you. We're talking about setting someone free from that financial burden on its own for apparently no reason, for the same reason that God decided to set a people free from slavery.
Right.
And this, to me, really starts popping things off, because then we have this whole evocation of, is it evocation or invocation? Anyway, either way, Jesus is invoking the Exodus not just as an important story, but because the center of what we are called to do, and especially when we think about how Marty talks about, like, this being the radical center of the story, and this being what we are called to do, that is like what God does, that is exactly parallel to what God does, and is also a duplication of what God does, which goes back to us being the firstborn and doing what our Father has done. We are here to liberate people. We are here to set people free. And if it's in your power to set someone free, set them free. the same way God set you free.
It's how Jesus opens up his ministry, right? As he reads that Isaiah passage,
Yes.
the Spirit of the Lord is upon me to do what?
Yes, set the slaves free.
To free the bound is one of the items on his to-do list, which is why John the Baptist is so upset with him. Hey, bro, I'm bound. What about me? You Messiah or not? And so who are the John Baptists in our lives that hopefully we're not physically holding in a basement somewhere, but the people with our unforgiveness or bitterness or resentment that we are holding captive in some way.
Yes.
And we're saying, well, maybe when the Shabbaton comes around, right? When Jubilee year shows up, at that point, maybe I'll be ready to let it go. Or maybe a kinsman redeemer will come along and tell me, oh, well, that family member wasn't really meaning that. They were really meaning this, right? And then, okay, fine, then I'll be freed. Nope.
And I think that's important. Like, I'm not trying to say this should only be thought of in terms of, financial bondage that people are in, but I think we need to have a more expansive view of what we think about when we think about freedom, liberation. Salvation is a word that fits in with those in the biblical context,
right?
And to not just see the maybe capital S salvation as the only kind of salvation God cares about, but that setting people free is telling God's story. And that can be in as small of a way of letting someone, being late to a meeting and saying, hey, don't worry about it. Don't apologize. You're fine. I'm here for you. Liberation is the business we are about, setting people free. And that can be in all sorts of ways. We should get creative in trying to find new ways to do that. And I think that is what Jesus is exhorting us to do, especially when we're in that tension of like, oh, I want to be close to God, but I see all these things in the world that are just so much bigger than me. It can feel like, we don't have anything and not even a place to start. And where do we start? We start with a daily bread. What has God given us to fill our cup, to give us life? And then we can just turn around and look around and say, hey, who can I set free?
Amazing.
Even if it's just for a second.
I love that.
And then where does Jesus go from here? Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Now, this one, I have a feeling someone might get this. Can you think of something in the Exodus story where specifically someone or some group is not led someplace? Don't lead us here.
We're talking about Mara, but that's not Exodus.
Yeah, no. All right.
No. Okay. What are you thinking?
Let's turn to Exodus chapter 13, verse 17. Brent, if you're counting, this is the second 17 verse that we're reading.
Yes. And the second from 13.
Yes.
We can find patterns in anything, Josh.
If we put our minds to it, using numbers that we made up to go on top of the text.
When Pharaoh let the people go, God did not lead them on the road through the Philistine country, though that was shorter. For God said if they face war, they might change their minds and return to Egypt.
Well.
Well.
Don't lead us into temptation. Don't lead us into situations that are going to be too much for us and make us want to go back. Don't lead us into a battle that's too hard for us to face. That, to me, feels like it lines up pretty well. And I think that especially this kind of feels like a little bit of a letdown. It's not quite as like punchy and like, yeah, we're supposed to go liberate people. Ugh. But I think what this does is it answers the voice in our head that raises its hand as soon as we say, let's start going out and liberating people. It goes, excuse me, but what if it's too much and I can't do it and I get in trouble, or it's too hard, or any of those things. All those doubts, all those questions, all those things that tangle us up from the jump. And it just says, just trust God to not lead you to the place that's going to, send you tumbling back down the hill. Just give that to God. Please don't lead us there.
Because that verse doesn't say he's not going to lead them to the Philistine because then they will surely die.
Yes.
It says because they'll turn around.
Yes.
And if one of the grand themes in this prayer has to do with us walking out the commandments, it's like turning around and going back is one of the things that gets in the way of that more than like actual death.
Yes.
Right? Most of the time, for most of us, thankfully, Death is not on the line.
Yes, but it is often the fear of that death that brings that up. Every time they're like, oh, we don't have enough food or water, which, pretty valid complaint if you ask me. But they start grumbling about that, and then they're like, oh, let's just go back to Egypt. It's like, oh, yeah, if they had also run into a bunch of, armed people, like that might have come up a lot earlier. And especially if it's a short route, might be even easier to turn around. If it's like, oh, we're only 5 minutes away. We're only 20 minutes into our journey. Let's just turn around now. Whereas, you've been out for a while. You've already been to the mountain, and you've had some time to really, really absorb our identity. That, I think, is important for us to be aware of as we go about this. Like, God isn't just trying to give us the shortest A to B route. There is something about the circuitous, sometimes inefficiencies of spiritual life that are part of God forming our identity and letting everything else that we've just prayed about in this prayer sink in, is that we don't want to run into every temptation. We don't want to conquer every spiritual thing, because if we just try and, set a personal record every time we lift, we're going to injure ourselves, and
So
then
true.
be out for the rest of the season. I'm probably mixing way too many sports metaphors.
No, I got that
I'm very
one.
sorry.
I was glad.
Yeah. So this is all couching us in this place where we are, in a sense, set free to go set other people free without worrying about, will we have enough? Will we be facing enemies that are too big? This is trusting God with all of those things, all those fears that tend to make us shrink back and say, I don't know if I can actually do that. And instead reminding us, no, your whole identity is that God is your parent, and that took the form of him setting you free, and you're carrying on that business. And because you were set free, you need to go set other people free, which I think, especially for Jesus, especially knowing how much he quotes Deuteronomy, when we think about the seven, and why I chose to still name this the seven, even though I'm not necessarily pulling out seven specific things, it's like, when with Deuteronomy, the book of Torah Jesus seems to be most familiar with, or go to the most. When it talks about Sabbath, it talks about it doesn't just say, do the Sabbath the same. It adds some stuff. It says specifically to actually, I should have pulled that up. I know where it is. It's Deuteronomy 5. I'll read this one, Brent. Don't you worry about it. I've got something else in Deuteronomy for you to read.
You worry.
It does. It has the same opening. You rest, you, your son, your daughter, your brother, your animals, your servants, any stranger who's with you, everyone rests. But then it adds this, so that your male slave and your female slave may rest with you. Interesting that it emphasizes that. And then it gives a totally different rationale of why we rest. It says, because you need to remember that you were a slave and that God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. That's why God commanded you to, and this is something I talked about in my last Shabbat series. This is one of the, I think, 2 times where it says, this is where you do Shabbat. This is where you asa Shabbat, which is a making word that is used in creation. It's very strange.
Right.
Why are we being told to do Shabbat? We're supposed to not do on Shabbat. But this is the heart. This is what Shabbat must do. This is why I think Jesus says, oh, healing someone, freeing someone from a disease. What's more Shabbat than that? Shabbat's liberation. Shabbat is telling a slave, hey, you don't have to work. You're not a slave today. Maybe the other days of the week, the kingdom of the world has you down. But today I'm going to set you free from this. You can rest today. And this brings me back to the bigger 7. And Brent, I'd like you to read this. If you can mosey on over to Deuteronomy 15. And this, I want us to hear and see if we remember anything from the Exodus in this. So yeah, Brent, why don't you read the beginning of this chapter of Deuteronomy, chapter 15. And we'll focus in on a few verses, but let's just hear the whole context.
At the end of every 7 years, you must cancel debts. This is how it is to be done. Every creditor shall cancel any loan they have made to a fellow Israelite. They shall not require payment from anyone among their own people, because the Lord's time for canceling debts has been proclaimed. You may require payment from a foreigner, but you must cancel any debt your fellow Israelite owes you. However, there need be no poor people among you, For in the land the Lord your God is giving you to possess as your inheritance, he will richly bless you, if only you fully obey the Lord your God and are careful to follow all these commands I am giving you today. For the Lord your God will bless you as he has promised, and you will lend to many nations, but will borrow from none. You will rule over many nations, but none will rule over you. If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites, in any of the towns of the land the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted toward them. Rather be open-handed and freely lend them whatever they need.
Now, there's a couple things in there that I want us to remember, because there's some caveats in there about your fellow Israelites versus strangers. But, Jesus had something to say about that, because the word for that's translated as your fellow Israelite is the same as the word that is later referenced when Jesus talks about who our neighbor is. So I think it's important for us to recognize, especially since we would be on the receiving end of the negative aspect of some of these laws, that Jesus came and said, yeah, but what if we made everyone your fellow neighbor? Setting that part aside, what's really interesting is in verse 7, when it talks about if there is someone who is poor among you, after just saying, hey, there doesn't need to be anyone poor among you. If there is a poor person among you, you shall not, but the phrase there is, you shall not harden your heart. Which, what does that remind us of?
Paro.
I
finally got one.
And if we remember all the way back to toward Marty's breakdown, which is based on Foreman's breakdown of the different words used to talk about hardening of the heart. There's one which means to make it heavy. To sometimes you just talk about being stupid or just kind of set in your ways. This is not that word. This is the other one. This is the strengthening one, to be more vehemently set in your ways, to double down. And when we think about the year of the Lord's release, the Sabbath of the yearly Sabbath, the Shemitah, God canceling everything, forgive others their debts as the Lord has forgiven you. There is a way in which that we can feel very safely ensconced in God's kingdom, where maybe we have taken some liberties and not realized that we've really just followed the world's will, the kingdoms all around us. Those things are really easily mixed up, and that's why God has to say in a couple short verses, yeah, let all these debts go. There doesn't need to be any poor, there should be enough to go around. And yet there will be a poor person among you. And when that does happen, when, even with everything I've given you, it's still not going to be perfect. You're not going to fulfill it perfectly. And when you see that imperfection, you have an opportunity to be like Pharaoh and to harden your hearts and to be on the other side of the question of which kingdom you serve. To me, this is really important to hear in contrast with how, and I don't even really have anything to add to the way you translated it and painted it last time with this beautiful remez to the blessing of David, where, we can feel a certain way about our resources, whether those are actual physical, tangible, fungible resources, or whether they are more ephemeral, our time, our attention, our emotional capacity, our willingness to believe other people and have empathy for them. It is easy to become tight-fisted and to become like a paro unto ourselves in our own little corner. And how important to remember with this soaring doxology that everything we have, all the goodness that David had piled up, that wasn't even for himself. It was for a future generation, for a temple he would never see. That reminder that everything we have, everything that goes beyond our daily bread, this is to build the temple. This is to liberate others. Mm. And that can take a lot of forms, but if it's not doing that, then it isn't part of that. We are withholding that kingdom power and glory from God.
Mm.
And especially as a daily reminder on these things to remember, like, oh yeah, I'm not just me sitting here in, 2025 or whatever future year you're listening to this in, where, I've got enough to eat and I'm comfortable and, I wish the world were different, but hey, what are you going to do? It's very easy, whatever your ideology is, however the historical moment finds you when you're listening to this. It's very easy to not do anything with that and to just sit in that malaise. And I personally find that returning to the Exodus, returning to the mission of liberation, that this idea of salvation is not just something that happened a long time ago on a cross, but that it is something we get to actively recreate and make alive and resurrect in people's lives in every way. From, as Jesus put it, from something as simple as a little bit of hospitality and a little bit of bread to something as big as releasing someone from their debts. Something that has no moral quandary. Person doesn't have to deserve it, doesn't have to be a good person, doesn't have to be contingent on them being a believer. In fact, it might be important to do that to people who aren't believers, people who don't hold the same values as you, people who, you might feel a little bit justified in keeping them locked up in debt, holding one over on them. Maybe that's exactly the thing that Jesus is asking us every day, 3 times a day, to pray in this way, to convict that and say, no, I'm here to set people free. I don't get to decide who, because it's everyone. I don't get to decide who my neighbor is, because I'm called to make everyone my neighbor with my actions.
It takes me back to a couple episodes ago. Brent and I were talking about the wages conversation in the prosperity gospel, and how do we work along these lines without falling into a pit. And of course, this is a huge component of that. Like, you already have enough and God has seen fit to deliver you more than you need. Amazing. That's not just to buy your, I don't know, whatever people want to buy. It's to liberate others with, and in that way, a poverty mindset about, no, I only need just enough to get through. And that's all God knows that I need, ends up also being selfish, because it's like, well, sure, yeah, that's all you need. That's great. Like your asceticism comment. But what about all the people around you?
Absolutely.
And in the Torah ethic of poverty, the stuff that you have, a portion of it belongs to the poor. It's not that the corners of your fields are yours.
Right.
And they're for you, and then you need to dispense them to the poor. And it's not even, so it goes the argument in Leviticus, that it's all God's, although, of course, that is made somewhere else. It's that your corners belong to the poor. And if you steal it from them, you better fear God, because he's going to step into that gap and champion the people who you were forgetting. So putting liberation as our identity, what we're moving out of, what we're centered in, and then that we get the privilege to partner with the God in that work in the world around us. And that's a huge part of putting the world back together.
Yeah.
It's a lovely reminder.
Absolutely. Love that. What about you, Brent? You got any thoughts?
I just need to be liberated from Zoom and Wi-Fi, apparently.
Yes, this has been maybe one of the most unwieldy Zoom sessions I've ever had with you, Brent. My goodness.
Technologically fraught. Yes, attributing all sorts of evil and other things to technology today, apparently.
Yes, Satan doesn't want you to hear this episode.
I guess not.
Trying to shut us down.
We'll put that in the little promo clip for this episode. Hopefully I have, by the time you're hearing us say these words, I have edited this episode into something coherent. Oh my goodness. It's been good though. This prayer has depths and depths and depths to it. And so it's angle, whatever.
Yeah.
I don't know how you do that in English. What's the Hebrew? How would you do that in Hebrew, Elle?
Exodus is not the name of the scroll.
Well,
Yes.
yeah. Well, if you were to take the name of the scroll in Hebrew and turn it into like a whatever.
Shematic?
Yeah.
There you go. That sounds great. Okay, so that's this episode. And that is the Talmudic Matthew portion of session 9.
Woohoo!
So we are moving on to Josh's episode.
Yeah.
On Kohelet.
Oh man, I didn't
Series, not episode. Series.
didn't even think about this, but Elle, you and I are also going to be together on the first episode for that. So everyone's just going to get a big run of Josh and Elle.
Power duo.
Mhm.
I'm happy we can bridge one another's work here.
Yeah.
It's been a joy. Yes, we
Truly.
will not be doing Talmudic Matthew next season. We're going to take a break for at least one season. So,
Oh, Shemitah, gotta let the land rest.
yeah. So we can let Matthew, poor old scroll, have his season of stillness before we return to him at a later date. But thanks for hanging on, everybody. It's been a good time, at least in this underground recording studio.
It is beautiful. Well, listeners can go to BamaOnASipeship.com, check the news page to see what we're up to. Maybe you're caught up. Maybe you're listening to this as we release it. Maybe you're listening to it years later. But whenever you are, check out that news page, figure out where we're going to be, what we're up to, what's new, what's happening. You can use the contact page on the website to get in touch with us. That will do it for this episode. So thank you for joining us on the Bama Podcast. We'll talk to you again soon.